I woke up in the ICU with burning pain in my lower abdomen and no feeling in my legs. The fluorescent lights above me felt like spotlights interrogating me while machines beeped steadily in the background. A nurse was adjusting my IV when I realized I wasn't alone. My mother was standing in the corner, her arms crossed like she was waiting for me to thank her. "We only wanted to help you," she said calmly. "This is what's best, Alicia. You'll see." I blinked slowly. My mouth was dry. I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a whisper. "What did you do to me?" She smiled, stepping forward as if she were visiting a patient she loved dearly. "Just a mild hormonal protocol, a little head start for your journey. You've wasted enough time. 31, no partner, no children. You'll thank me later." The nurse didn't say a word. She looked down at her clipboard, pretending not to hear. I reached for the call button, but it wasn't there. My heart raced. "Don't panic," my mother said. "Everything was done professionally. We even used your insurance." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't just another one of her pressure-filled holiday dinners or guilt-tripped family Zoom calls. She had crossed a line I never thought she'd dare to approach. She had taken my body, my choices, and made them hers. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight back. I was going to make her pay, and I was never going to be her breeding machine. My name is Alicia Morgan. I'm 31 years old, unmarried, and childless by choice. I live alone in Denver, Colorado, in a quiet second-floor apartment near the college where I teach. My students call me Professor Morgan, and I teach sociology with a focus on women's rights, power dynamics, and family structures. I'm proud of the work I do. I've built a life based on knowledge, compassion, and a firm belief in autonomy. I didn't think my biggest battle for bodily freedom would come from my own mother. Her name is Evelyn Morgan. She's 58, a former community organizer who now runs a nonprofit called Strong Roots, which claims to support family values and traditional motherhood. In truth, it's a tightly controlled network of women, mostly religious, mostly white, who advocate for early motherhood home birthing and what they call feminine restoration. I grew up in her ideology. Every day of my childhood in rural Idaho was steeped in language about purpose, sacrifice, and divine design. From age 6, I was told that a woman's highest calling was to become a mother. Education was a useful bonus, not a necessity. Freedom was conditional, framed around obedience and modesty. My younger sister Becca absorbed it all with shining eyes. She was always the favorite, sweet, agreeable, nurturing. At 28, she already had 4 children and a husband who worked as a youth pastor. She lived down the road from Mom, their homes practically mirror images filled with pastel wall quotes and framed ultrasound pictures. Me, I left at 18 as soon as I got my scholarship. First to Oregon for undergrad, then to Colorado for my master's. I didn't visit home often. The pressure was always thick. Questions about dating, marriage, fertility. When I turned 30, Mom said I had 2 good years left. It was supposed to be a joke. But the way she looked at me like I was wasting a sacred gift made it clear she wasn't joking. She sent me books about natural fertility, forwarded me emails from hopeful couples looking for surrogates, and asked if I had considered egg donation before it was too late. I laughed it off, distanced myself further, but she never stopped. Strong Roots was her life now. It wasn't just a job, it was a mission. She hosted weekly luncheons for local moms, gave seminars on purposeful parenting, and mentored young women in fertility journeys. At some point, she started referring to Becca as a miracle vessel. Every baby Becca birthed was celebrated like a divine accomplishment. Facebook posts, church celebrations, community parades. I was always in the photos standing off to the side, smiling politely, trying to be supportive while also wanting to run. I didn't hate my sister, but I hated what she represented. A life I had escaped but could never completely sever. Last Thanksgiving, Mom made a speech about generational blessings. She turned to Becca and said, "You've brought so much light into this family." Then she looked at me and said, "Maybe next year we'll have another reason to give thanks." The whole table laughed. I did too, but it felt like acid on my tongue. That night, I told her clearly I don't want children. I never have. I want my career, my students, my independence. I want to live life on my terms. Her face fell in slow motion. And then she said something I'll never forget. "That's not you talking. That's your trauma. That's your education poisoning you." I left early. I didn't call her for weeks, but she kept calling me, leaving voicemails about forgiveness and healing and God's plan. I started blocking her numbers. Still, her presence found me. Strong Roots volunteers showed up at one of my lectures with pamphlets. Becca tagged me in Facebook posts about motherhood fulfillment. A friend sent me a clip from one of Mom's webinars titled, "When Your Daughter Resists Her Divine Calling." She never named me, but the story was mine. I should have known something bigger was coming. I should have seen it all as a build-up, but I wanted to believe the worst was behind me, that she was finally learning to let go. I was wrong. She was preparing the biggest betrayal of all, one that would land me in a hospital bed feeling fire in my veins and a chill I still haven't shaken. It started when I was 11, though the signs were there even earlier. That year, my mother enrolled Becca and me in what she called Home Harvest. It wasn't an after-school program, and it wasn't optional. Every Tuesday and Thursday, instead of going to the community center like the other kids, we stayed home to learn about the sacred path of motherhood. She turned the basement into a simulation room. There were posters of fetal development stages, a whiteboard with charts about ovulation cycles, and a stack of baby dolls lined up like a plastic nursery. At first, it felt like a game. Becca loved it. She carried her assigned doll everywhere, named it Gracie, and sang lullabies. I was given a heavier doll with stiff limbs and a permanent crying feature that triggered if you didn't cradle it properly. "Motherhood isn't always soft," Mom said when I complained. "You don't get to choose your baby's temperament." She gave us journals and asked us to record our maternal thoughts after each session. I wrote things like, "I hate this," and "I don't want kids." Becca wrote poetry about breastfeeding and God's miracles. After a few weeks, Mom introduced the belly weights. She filled canvas sacks with rice and strapped them to our stomachs using elastic bands she made from old yoga pants. We were told to wear them for 2 hours every Saturday, walking around the house doing chores, getting used to the weight of life. If we took them off, we started the timer over. Becca didn't mind. She waddled with dramatic flair, patting her belly like a proud, expecting mother. I once tried to hide mine in the laundry room. Mom found it within an hour and doubled my time. "Real mothers don't quit," she scolded. "They carry on." One day, we had a mock labor session. She dimmed the lights, played soft instrumental music, and told us to breathe through the pain. Becca was fully committed, even letting Mom guide her through fake contractions. I refused. I sat in the corner, arms crossed, silent. Mom said I had rejected my femininity and would need extra sessions. At school, I started zoning out. I fell behind in math, stopped joining group projects. One teacher pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay at home. I said yes because what could I say? That my mom was running a boot camp for future breeders in our basement. That she weighed my value in uterus potential. Becca got her first period at 12. Mom cried tears of joy and made a cake shaped like a womb. I'm not exaggerating. Red velvet, frosted fallopian tubes, the whole thing. She called it a woman's entrance into her sacred responsibility. When my period came months later, I didn't tell anyone. I stuffed tissues in my underwear and tried to pretend nothing had changed. Of course, she found out eventually. She made me hold the cake for a photo, posted it on the church bulletin board, and wrote in Sharpie above the picture, "2 wombs now blooming." That was the moment I realized I was not a daughter in her eyes. I was a project, a prototype, a vessel. And from then on, I built my life around getting as far away from her as possible. I joined every extracurricular that let me stay after school. I volunteered at the library just to avoid dinner. I read every feminist book I could get my hands on. When college applications opened, I only applied to out-of-state schools. I told myself that once I left, the indoctrination would fade. But trauma doesn't care about geography. It clings. It infects. Even now, I can still remember the texture of that rice-filled belly weight, the way it pinched my skin when I sat down. I remember Becca reciting verses about obedience while rocking her doll like it was her job. I remember Mom whispering in the dark, "One day you'll thank me. One day you'll understand." But I never thanked her. And what I understand now is this. She wasn't preparing us for motherhood. She was preparing us to surrender. Preparing us to hand over our bodies without question. And Becca, bless her, didn't stand a chance. She embraced every role, every lesson, every weighted belly and staged contraction. She became the dream child while I became the disappointment. But disappointment has its own kind of power. It sees through the fantasy, it knows how to run, and someday it learns how to fight back. The signs started quietly like cracks forming beneath the surface, invisible until they split wide open. It began with texts from my mother that seemed harmless on the surface, but dripped with expectation. One message read, "Your cousin Jenna just had her second baby. Her life looks so full." Another included a photo of a smiling Becca holding her newborn with the caption, "Such joy! Maybe soon you'll understand." I ignored them at first. I'd seen this pattern before, but then came the packages. Books about fertility after 30 brochures from local fertility clinics, vitamin samples labeled preconception support. I called her and asked her to stop. I told her clearly and calmly that I wasn't interested in children, that I had no obligation to reproduce simply because I could. She responded with silence and then softly, "You'll change your mind." All women do, especially when they meet the right man. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so eerily confident. Then one day, she invited me to a family wellness weekend at Becca's house. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I hadn't seen my nieces and nephews in months, and I missed them. The weekend felt off from the moment I arrived. There were pamphlets on the kitchen table about womb care, hormonal balance, and natural paths to conception. My mother claimed they were just leftovers from a Strong Roots meeting, but they were placed deliberately facing me as if begging to be read. During dinner, she passed around a bottle of her homemade elderberry tonic. She said it was immune-boosting and good for hormone regulation. I barely took a sip. The next morning, I woke up nauseous, my head pounding, my breasts tender. I blamed it on travel stress on the elevation change. But the symptoms didn't go away when I returned to Denver. In fact, they worsened. I started having sharp pelvic pain, night sweats, fatigue so heavy it felt like drowning in wet sand. At first, I thought maybe I had the flu, or worse, something serious. I made an appointment at a local clinic. The doctor ran tests and asked if I'd been undergoing fertility treatments. I laughed. Then I saw her face. She wasn't joking. My hormone levels were elevated in a way consistent with ovarian stimulation protocols. I froze. I hadn't taken anything, not knowingly. The doctor looked concerned and scheduled a pelvic ultrasound. She warned me about the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. I nodded numbly, pretending to understand, my mind racing back to that weekend, to the tonic. Could it have been laced with something? It seemed impossible, but nothing felt safe anymore. I called my mother. I asked if she had put anything in the tonic, anything besides elderberries. Her answer was calm, measured. "Only love," she said, "and a few natural enhancers, herbal support. Nothing harmful." My skin went cold. I hung up. That evening, I started vomiting blood. I was rushed to the emergency room and admitted to the ICU. The diagnosis was OHSS, a rare condition that can be fatal if untreated. My ovaries were swollen and leaking fluid into my abdomen. I had trouble breathing. The doctors pumped me full of IV fluids and blood thinners. When I was stable enough to speak, I told them everything. A nurse listened carefully, asked quiet questions, and left the room. I didn't know it at the time, but she would be the one to call in a domestic violence advocate. Meanwhile, my mother arrived at the hospital with flowers and her trademark calm. She told the staff I'd been under a lot of stress lately, that I had always struggled with emotional imbalance. She handed them a folder. It contained printouts of emails between us, selectively edited to make me look unstable. It also included a letter allegedly from me expressing deep regret about never having children. The handwriting was close to mine, but slightly off. A trained eye might catch it, but a busy nurse might not. She tried to get access to my room. The nurse refused. Security was called. For the first time, someone outside my world saw her for what she was. A line had been crossed. A report was filed. I was assigned a patient advocate. I thought the worst had passed, but I hadn't seen anything yet. The woman who raised me wasn't finished. She had already laid the foundation for something far more insidious, something she believed she had every right to do, because in her mind, I wasn't her daughter. I was a failing investment, a womb wasting time, and if she couldn't convince me to fulfill my purpose willingly, she would do it by force. I remember the moment I realized she had gone too far. It was at a dinner she claimed was for reconciliation. I had been home from the hospital for barely 2 weeks, still weak, still processing the trauma. She said she wanted to apologize, said she wanted to explain. I hesitated but agreed to meet at her house. Becca was there, along with a few women I vaguely recognized from her Strong Roots circles. The table was set like it was Thanksgiving candles flickering a large roast at the center. I sat at the far end, my body tense, scanning every plate, every glass. My mother opened the evening with a prayer thanking God for healing and family and second chances. As the others began to eat, she raised her glass and made a toast to fertility, to the miracle of life, to the strength of women who carried generations. Then she turned to me. "We've already started the next phase," she said. "You don't have to be afraid." I felt a chill rise in my spine. Becca stood and walked behind me, placing her hands gently on my shoulders. "There's a family waiting," she whispered. "A beautiful couple. They're already praying for you." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. My mother pulled out a small case from her purse and set it on the table. Inside were syringes pre-filled, neatly arranged. "Just a small boost," she said. "You've already responded so well to the first round. We can do this properly now under supervision." I backed away. One of the women stood to block the exit. Another moved closer, speaking calmly about trust and destiny. Becca grabbed my arm. "Please, Alicia," she pleaded. "Just try. Don't fight it." I screamed, loud and raw, enough to make them freeze. I shoved the woman at the door, ran to the hallway, and locked myself in the bathroom. My phone was in my coat, which I had left in the living room. My only weapon was a towel rod I yanked from the wall and held like a spear. They knocked gently, tried to coax me out. I didn't respond. I sat there for an hour, shaking until finally the house went quiet. I waited longer. When I finally crept out, they were gone. My coat was gone too. I sprinted barefoot down the block to a neighbor's porch and banged on the door until they answered. I begged them to call the police. When they arrived, my mother acted shocked, said I had overreacted, claimed the syringes were herbal supplements for Becca. I tried to explain, but without evidence, it was her word against mine. No one was arrested, no charges filed, but something shifted that night. The officer who took my statement, a woman named Detective Haynes, gave me her card. "This isn't the first time I've heard something like this," she said. "If you remember anything else, anything concrete, call me." I moved out of my apartment that weekend. I changed my number. I filed a civil order of protection, which was only partially granted. My mother still sent letters, handwritten, poetic, frightening. She talked about wasted wombs, about divine timing, about obedience. I sent everything to Detective Haynes. Then one morning I received a hospital bill for a consultation I never had. It was from a fertility clinic 2 towns over, dated a week before my hospitalization. I called the clinic and asked to confirm the appointment. The receptionist said, "Oh, yes, Ms. Morgan. Your mother checked you in. You signed the intake form." My voice cracked. "Can you send me a copy of the signature?" What they emailed was a shaky version of my name, close but not quite right. I forwarded it to Haynes. 2 days later, she knocked on my door with a warrant. They were opening an investigation. The clinic had been flagged in the past for aggressive practices. Several of their patients were connected to Strong Roots. It was enough to start asking questions. In the meantime, I was spiraling. My employer had received anonymous messages suggesting I was mentally unstable. My students noticed I seemed distant. My lecture evaluations dropped. Someone hacked into my school email and sent out a message about my personal fertility struggles. I had to meet with HR to explain. I tried to stay composed, tried to keep teaching, but the walls were closing in. One night I went to bed and woke up in a psychiatric facility. I had no memory of how I got there. They said I had been found wandering near a bridge disoriented. I had no history of mental illness, no history of blackouts. But there I was in paper scrubs with a psychiatrist asking about suicidal ideation. I told them the truth, that I believed someone had drugged me, that my mother had been trying to force fertility treatments on me, that I was being set up. They nodded, slowly took notes, and adjusted my meds. It took me 3 days to convince them to let me call a lawyer. When I finally did, she came immediately. Her name was Lauren Chin, a friend from grad school who had become a civil rights attorney. She didn't laugh at my story. She believed me. She filed a motion to review my commitment, pulled medical records, subpoenaed clinic files. When I was released, I went straight to the courthouse with her. We filed a formal petition to revoke my mother's medical proxy, which I never knowingly signed. We requested a restraining order. We opened a civil case, and we requested an emergency hearing to block any further procedures under my name. The courtroom was cold and sterile. My mother sat across from me, her expression composed, her lawyer smug. I sat beside Lauren, my hands trembling, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready, because now I had more than trauma. I had proof, and I was going to use every ounce of it to bring her down. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and by the time we arrived, the courtroom was already half full. Word had spread. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but they waited in the hallway with their notebooks and cameras, whispering as I walked past. Inside, the judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics. My mother's lawyer opened with charm and concern, calling me a brilliant but confused young woman, suffering from reproductive delusions, citing episodes of paranoia and emotional instability. He referred to the psychiatric report from the facility where I had been held, pointing out key phrases like grandiose persecution narrative and emotional dysregulation. I sat silently, my heart thudding, waiting for my chance. Lauren stood and delivered a meticulous counter. She laid out the timeline, the strange symptoms following my mother's elderberry tonic, the hormone levels that matched fertility drugs, the forged signatures from the clinic, the hospital intake nurse's observations. She submitted digital evidence email headers, call logs, and most powerfully, a voice recording from Detective Haynes. In the recording, the detective confirmed the existence of an active investigation into strong roots and noted patterns of coercion linked to the clinic. My mother's face never flinched. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, nodding solemnly as if mourning my mental state. Then came the surprise witness, one of the women from that dinner party. She had left Strong Roots recently and agreed to testify anonymously. She described how the group groomed young women, used emotional manipulation and family pressure to guide them into becoming surrogates or egg donors. She spoke of meeting as where my mother discussed my wasted potential and planned a gentle push to bring me into alignment. It was damning. The judge reviewed the medical documents. She examined the inconsistencies in my mother's records, the suspicious timing of the psychiatric hold, the absence of any official emergency transport logs. Finally, she looked at me and asked, "Ms. Morgan, are you able to speak on your own behalf?" I stood. My legs shook, but my voice didn't. I told her everything. About my childhood. About the fake maternity trainings. About the pressure, the guilt, the punishments disguised as love. About the recent dinner, the syringes, the lock-in. I told her about waking up in a psych ward, not remembering how I got there, and realizing that my autonomy had been stripped one layer at a time. "I am not mentally ill," I said. "I'm not delusional. I'm being hunted by a narrative created by someone who cannot accept that I am not her." My voice cracked. She sees me not as a daughter, but as a damaged resource. She cannot control my mind, so she tried to control my body. Silence filled the room. The judge tapped her pen against the desk, then delivered her decision. She denied the conservatorship petition. She granted a full restraining order. She referred the case for potential criminal investigation. And then she looked at my mother and said, "If any further attempts to interfere with this woman's bodily autonomy are made, this court will pursue maximum penalties allowed under state law." My mother didn't cry. She didn't shout. She stood calmly, gathered her things, and left. But I knew it wasn't over. Women like her don't stop because a judge tells them to. They just shift strategy. After the hearing, Lauren and I walked out into a sea of reporters. I didn't speak. I wasn't ready to tell the world, but I knew I would someday. The next week, I received a message from a former student. She said she had seen the court listing online and wanted to tell me something. Her cousin had once been involved with Strong Roots. She too had been pressured into donating eggs after a family intervention. She offered to connect us. More stories followed, each one eerily familiar. Girls from conservative homes, fertility-focused mothers, clinics with overlapping staff, and always an air of secrecy. I began keeping records, dates, names, details. I started building a case beyond myself. Meanwhile, my mother's attempts to reach me continued in subtler ways. Letters delivered to my workplace, voicemails from blocked numbers. Becca texted once just a photo of her newborn with the words, "He looks like you." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I knew that as long as I was within reach, I would always be seen as a resource, not a person. And I wasn't going back. Not ever. After the court ruling, I thought I could finally breathe, but the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was strategy. I could feel her regrouping, reshaping her approach, and I knew I couldn't relax. If I was going to stay free, I needed to stay smart. That meant gathering more than just my own evidence. It meant understanding the entire machine behind Strong Roots. I began playing the role she had always wanted from me, but this time on my terms. I publicly posted neutral, almost sweet messages online about family healing and reconciliation. I reactivated my social media with a carefully curated feed photos of me holding Becca's baby's quotes about forgiveness articles on maternal bonding. I tagged my mother. I let her believe I was softening. Meanwhile, I was reaching out to every contact who had ever been associated with Strong Roots, quietly, cautiously using encrypted email accounts and untraceable numbers. I set up interviews with former members, recorded them with consent, and built a private dossier. Patterns emerged. Financial transactions between the clinic and the nonprofit, donations linked to specific fertility cases, repeated use of the same approved psychiatrists. But I needed a smoking gun. That's when I decided to go back just once. I signed up anonymously for a Strong Roots webinar on fertility after trauma. I used a burner laptop, a fake name, and kept my camera off. My mother hosted it, of course, with her usual calm authority. She spoke about lost daughters, about how our culture rewards rebellion but punishes nurture, about how sometimes love means helping someone accept their divine path. Then she mentioned a recent success case of a woman who had resisted surrogacy but had finally found clarity after a temporary hold for evaluation. She never said my name, but everyone knew. I hit record. That clip, along with a few others, became the centerpiece of my formal complaint to the State Medical Board and the Department of Health and Human Services. Lauren helped me submit it anonymously through a protected channel. We didn't want her to trace it back until the investigation was fully underway. At the same time, I contacted a journalist I trusted from a reproductive rights organization. She'd been following coercion stories for years, but hadn't yet found one that threaded medical fraud, religious manipulation, and familial control all in one case. Until now. She listened to every detail, checked my sources, and agreed to move forward. I gave her everything: the fake intake forms, the clinic correspondence, the video from the webinar. I blurred names, removed identifying info for the women I had spoken with, but the story held. She promised to protect me until I was ready to go public. Then she said something that surprised me. "If you ever choose to share your name," she said, "I think people need to hear it. Because it's not just about what happened. It's about the fact that you're still standing." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by documents, printouts, files. My world looked like a detective's board in a crime show. Red strings connected people and places, events, and dates. And I realized something. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the witness, the whistleblower, the beginning of the end for something much bigger than my mother. But I still had to be careful, because the moment she sensed that I was back in control, she would do whatever it took to flip the narrative. Again. So I smiled into the camera during family Zooms. I nodded politely at Becca's updates. I accepted the occasional gift basket sent to my department. I played the part, because compliance was the best disguise, and revenge was better served through strategy than rage. The final confrontation happened almost exactly 1 year after the night I locked myself in my mother's bathroom with a towel rod and fear humming through my bones. It was the culmination of months of calculated silence, quiet planning, and 1,000 invisible battles waged behind calm smiles. The state launched a formal investigation into Strong Roots and its affiliated clinic following multiple complaints submitted anonymously. Some of those complaints came from women I'd never met but who had read the published article that eventually ran under the title Harvested by Faith. I had agreed to go on record publicly with my name and face. The article exploded. There were thousands of shares, interviews, and debates. News anchors used phrases like medical coercion and systemic fertility abuse. Church leaders distanced themselves from strong roots. Clinics scrubbed websites. But it wasn't over, not for me, because the civil case I had filed with Lauren was coming to trial. My mother filed a counterclaim for defamation, saying the article had destroyed her nonprofit, her reputation, her life's work. I expected rage, but when she walked into that courtroom, she was composed, dressed in beige and pearls, the portrait of Grace. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had once been hers but now belonged to the world. We sat across from each other in silence as the attorneys made their opening statements. Her team painted her as a misunderstood matriarch, a woman of faith who had only ever wanted the best for her children. My side laid out a clear, documented timeline of manipulation, forgery, psychological pressure, and medical endangerment. Becca was called to testify. She walked slowly to the stand, thinner than I remembered, her face drawn. She looked at me once, then stared straight ahead. She defended our mother at first, saying she had made her own choices, that she loved being a mom. But when the questioning turned to the number of pregnancies, the chronic infections, the miscarriage she hadn't told anyone about, her voice cracked. She admitted that she had once wanted to go to school, that she had considered not having a fourth child, but didn't feel like she could say no. She never forced me. Becca said, her hands shaking, but she made it impossible to choose anything else. The courtroom fell silent. The judge asked her to clarify. I never signed up to be the example, Becca whispered, but I didn't know how to stop. When she stepped down, my mother didn't look at her. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, slowly feeling every eye on me, not because I was fragile, but because I wasn't. I told the truth again. Not just the trauma, but the aftermath, the fear, the gaslighting, the damage done to my health, my career, my name. I explained the power of maternal control when disguised as love. I described the moment I realized my body was being used as a symbol, a tool, a campaign promise for a movement I never believed in. I ended with one sentence: I am not a vessel. I am a person. The judge looked tired by the end of closing arguments. She called for a recess and then returned an hour later with her ruling. She found in my favor full damages, formal censure against the clinic, an order to dissolve Strong Roots under state fraud statutes, and a permanent injunction against my mother having any legal or medical authority over me or Becca ever again. My mother didn't flinch. She stood, adjusted her shawl, and walked out without a word. Becca didn't follow her. She stood next to me as the courtroom emptied and said, I think I need a break from all of them. I nodded. You deserve one. Outside, reporters crowded the steps. I gave one short statement. This isn't about hate. It's about healing through truth. Then I left. The trial was over, but the work was just beginning. Because while one woman had tried to own my body, hundreds had messaged me saying the same thing had happened to them. I wasn't just free. I was responsible. And I was ready. In the months that followed the trial, I returned to teaching slowly at first. Just one class a semester while I adjusted to being visible in a way I never wanted to be. Students began addressing me with a different kind of respect, one rooted not just in academics, but in resilience. They asked questions after class, not about the syllabus, but about consent autonomy, how to recognize coercion when it comes wrapped in love. I started a campus group focused on reproductive rights, not just for students, but for staff, many of whom had their own quiet stories. I became a mentor to young women who had never been told they could say no and still be whole. Becca moved into a small apartment across town with her kids. She stopped attending Strong Roots events and started therapy. We met for coffee once a week. Sometimes we just sat in silence. Other times we laughed about childhood things moments before it all became so heavy. She told me she didn't know if she'd ever forgive Mom, but she wanted her daughters to know there was another way to grow up. That was enough for now. I hadn't heard from our mother since the ruling. Occasionally, I would receive vague letters from distant relatives, passive-aggressive messages about reconciliation and forgiveness, about family above all. I never replied. One evening as I was leaving campus, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was a young woman, her voice shaking. She said she had just left a Strong Roots meeting, that she had overheard my name, that they were still operating under a new name. She didn't know what to do, but she had written down everything. I called her back and listened to her story, and when she was done, I told her what someone had once told me. You are not crazy. You are not wrong. And you are not alone. That night, I sat down at my desk and opened a new folder on my laptop. I titled it Survivors. I didn't know how many stories it would hold, but I knew it was only the beginning, because the truth is, the battle for autonomy doesn't end with one courtroom victory. It is a lifelong defense of the boundaries we build to protect ourselves. My mother tried to reduce me to a function, a purpose, a biology. But I reclaimed something deeper. I reclaimed my story, and now I teach others how to reclaim theirs. We are not vessels. We are not blank slates to be written on by culture or faith or family. We are entire lives deserving of choice, and I will never let anyone forget that.